So famous best guy ever, Peter Thiel, recently did this interview with the New York Times about a week or so. It got some buzz online. Maybe you guys saw some things about it. Very weird angles being taken in this interview. Like there's a lot of discussion about like the Antichrist and all these things. A little strange to do in an interview. But the two words that were most seen in this interview were progress and stagnation, right? It was a lot of ideas about what is progress, why Peter Thiel personally doesn't believe it's happening. By the way, if you could all comment like, we love you, Peter Thiel, or shout out Peter Thiel. I am trying to get my Palantir score up right now. So that'd really be doing me a solid if we could turn this into a Peter Thiel love session in the comments below. I'm just really trying to get my score up, if that's okay. Anyways, though, that aside, I think it's interesting because obviously, Peter Thiel coming at it from the perspective he is, giving him good faith here, because I do genuinely think this is an interesting discussion, divorced from this interview and the buzz it got. He obviously sees progress as like technology, right? Science, making new stuff, going to Mars, all that stuff that you hear in Silicon Valley coming out of there, right? Interesting stuff. But I want to ask a different question, because recently in a Paint&Talk, a couple Paint&Talks ago now, I said something about like, you know, if you are to burn down a forest and build a factory that makes robots, that will be seen as progress, right? In the eyes of institutions, in the eyes of how the average person perceives progress. Obviously, none of us would call that progress because the robots will end up like Terminator and you just burnt down a forest. And as much as we have this new technology, it's not exactly a good thing, right? The conclusion I kind of came to off of that was that progress is not a good thing. Not that progress is a bad thing, that progress is just a neutral thing, and sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad, right? I think that's probably the accurate answer in terms of getting a definition of progress down. However, I think there's a more interesting question to be asked right behind that of, you know, we have all these facilities at our disposal now. We're getting pretty advanced, you know, I don't think we're as advanced as we can get, but like we're getting up there. We've got some crazy science stuff going on. And what do we want progress to be? Not from a definitional standpoint, but from a more philosophical standpoint. What do we want progress to look like? What does progress look like? And how do you do good progress, right? I think this is a really hard question to answer because there's so many strands to look at this from. And I think maybe this is wrong, but I feel like this is probably a very modern question to ask, right? Because when you're like in the Middle Ages, right? And like, the people are dying from diseases, like they're like going to the well and having like a bad sip of water and that takes everybody in your village out. Progress is a very straightforward thing, right? You get a new building up and the doctor comes in. That's progress, right? You survive 1 year longer than, you know, your neighbor or something. Like that's progress. Like medical stuff, very direct stuff, right? Science at one point had, and Peter Thiel even speaks about this in the interview, a very Baconian, as he puts it, the ideas of like Francis Bacon, of like science is an eternally good thing. You can obviously debate on this, whether you think science is a complete good thing or not. I think it's also an interesting question in its own right, but back then, science was a pretty good thing, usually, because you didn't have the science to make all these bad things, you know? Like, now we have so much science, and a lot of that science gets spent on companies being like, hey, come in here and make a new social media program that will make 5-year-olds never stop going on their parents' phone and use their credit cards to give us money for advertising. Like, now we can do that. Back in the Middle Ages, what was the worst that would happen? Like, they'd be like, hey, you're good with spells, you're a warlock, come in and make me a poison to poison my 8th son who's trying to kill me for the throne. Like, obviously, not a great thing, but like, the damage you can do nowadays is much worse. So I think this is a very, very important question to ask right now, right? Because progress does not always look like making a new invention now. There's a lot of questions to be asked. And I almost feel, too, that as we get here, like, I wonder if philosophy as a whole has just sort of been a failed project. Because if you go back to the very start of modern philosophy, like Plato, one of his first ideas is this idea of like a philosopher king. And it's almost always been a tradition in philosophy, well, in Western philosophy. I don't know enough about Eastern philosophy to really speak on it, to be honest. But in Western philosophy, it's at least a very, very common tradition to somebody be like, we're doing this philosophy because it's going to run the world. And in some cases, it very much has ended up running the world, right? Philosophers come up with very important things. A great example is Francis Bacon. The scientific method started from his philosophy, and that's led to a bunch of stuff. Good job. But I think also, like, it's almost hard for me to be like, yeah, philosophy's been a successful project over the years, because the philosophy is no longer changing the world now, and all this time we've put into coming up with these theories of morality have been at the whims now of investment people, like exec boards, what can generate profit to like do some things that aren't good. Like, it's like, I think a lot of philosophers back in the day had the idea of like, someday all decisions will be made in the mind of a philosopher, and the philosopher will be making these decisions, the idea of morality. And you know, I'm not trying to say that philosophers are some class of people who should be ruling over the world, not by any means. We can see how that would end up in some cases, it would not be good at all. But the idea that like someday a moral authority will come and morality will be placed before all of these other worldly things is a very common idea in philosophy, and that's just not happened. Like, progress is not at all at the whims of any sort of critical thought, other than, honestly, most of the time, can this make money? And I think that's interesting, because what does progress look like? Like, on average, I think there's some things that we can knock off right away, like some good progress to be made. Medical tech. Medical tech is a great example of this. This is like almost everybody's caveat with AI too, right? Where like there's a ton of people obviously that really hate AI as it comes out, and the caveat they always give is like, we should use this for cancer though. Like as much as this is really scary and I hate AI, we should use this to cure cancer. And stuff like that's very easy to say, but why is it good, right? I'm gonna ask the very silly question now. Why is it good to cure cancer? Obvious answer there. So the person can live longer, so they can increase their potential, so their life can have more possibilities. They have more autonomy over their own body, right? Same reason, like, when a guy's disabled in a wheelchair and we can't cure him, why do we want to cure that disease? Like, why, you know, I think it is, as much as something we never think about, a good question to ask of like, why does it matter to the rest of us if there's just a guy here? Obviously, we all want to be like, well, we want to help people, but realistically, like, the idea of like, why is it good to make somebody better when they have an ailment, right? He could be very happy in that wheelchair. The thing that we want to get to though is like, no, we want to increase his possibility. We want to make it so we can go up more things. We want to make it so he can live a full autonomous life with lots of possibility. I think we also should look at not just medical things, but like history, right? Why was it good to give people like rights, right? When they didn't have them before, why was it a good thing to give them rights? Obviously, we all know this is a great thing when this happens. You know, one thing I will say that I've never understood, and I'm really gonna hope everybody agrees with this, because it'd be very strange if people have, like, I genuinely don't even understand the opposite perspective on this. Why are people like thinking like, oh no, there's an end to the rights we should be giving people? Like, I don't care what anybody does, you know what I mean? Like, I think everybody should be like, go do whatever you want to do. Like, I don't think, listen, if you're like, I think some people are you know, annoying or whatever, like, I guess whatever, sure, that's your opinion. Like, if you're in the Midwest, like, I'm sure you have, you know, some opinions that are crazy or whatever, but, like, to be like, we should go, like, govern the idea of this in general, I think is so bizarre. I think it's a very bizarre thing. I don't think there should ever be, in the year 2025, a debate over who gets rights ever again. Like, I think we should have cracked this by now. It's everybody. The answer is everybody. That's why they're called human rights, not like, you know, rights for the people I like. Like, they're human, but either way, that's a weird side tangent. I hope everybody agrees, though. Please tell me how great that was in the comments below. No, I'm joking. But why is it a good idea? Why do we want, when we look back in history and we're like, these people were really oppressed, but we gave them, not we gave them rights, they were given rights by the government at the time. Why is that a good thing? Obviously, it's a very similar explanation actually to this idea of illness and stuff. Like, it's, you know, they have more possibility, they have more autonomy over their own lives. And I think that's a big gap here that we don't see quite as much today. At least not in, you know, a lot of people watching this are going to be living an ostensibly middle-class existence by global standards, an extremely upper-class existence. So like, we don't have many of these problems anymore of like, we don't have autonomy over our own lives. Of course, there are many cases in which you don't have autonomy over your own life, but like on a day-to-day basis, right? Being like, you know, I genuinely cannot exercise my vision for myself is definitely more of a rare occurrence. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, that'd be very stupid to say, but it's definitely more of a rare occurrence than it's ever been in history for the audience that'd be watching this, of like an ostensibly middle-class person in America, is like the average YouTube viewer, right? So, moving on from that, like, so we're good on this front, right? Historically, if you look back at like, why do you want to cure X thing, right? Why do you still want to cure X thing? Or why do you want to give X group of people the ability to do this? It's to increase possibility, autonomy, these things, right? Equality is a big thing. Hopefully one day a thing that will fade once everybody becomes equal. Equality won't even be a question, right? Almost in the same way that like, we don't even, like, if you're somebody who is historically going through a series of oppression, right, as we're thinking about, you probably like are hyper aware of the fact that you cannot exercise your vision of your own life. Like, how many roadblocks are around you? I think we've moved, once again, we as in the audience, there's still great problems in this world that need to be solved, of course, but we as in the average YouTube viewer, we've moved past the point of being there so far that like we forget that that's the whole point. You know what I mean? Everybody should have the autonomy to live their vision of their own life and an infinite possibility as much as you can make it. So with that being said, progress should, logic would say, exist as an extension of this. Things that, you know, we are autonomous people right now. Like let's say we're at that stage, right? You're healthy, you're able to do generally what you want. Obviously, you still have things like work and all these other things to go about, but you can generally do what you want. You don't have too many roadblocks on living the life you want to live. At least what you're in the spot that the whole world has deemed to be like, you're good, you got it, you're good, right? What does progress look like from there? Because you have the possibility, autonomy. What do you want more? I think a lot of people would answer that to ask for more is spoiled. But are there things that could increase your autonomy, that could increase your possibility, that could make it so you can do more? The answer is yes, obviously. An iPhone's a great example of this. I mean, there is, I'm here in New York, very blessed to be, because there's a lot of opportunity here, but let's say that I wasn't here in New York and I was in a place where it's like, I can't meet people with my common interest, or I can't go about my life meeting people who I want to meet that will help me out and like not admire, but be like, I think this guy has cool art, and watch it, right? The internet's a great way to do that, right? I have even more possibility now that I have this thing. So I think that's sort of is that the lens that progress should exist in then? And then I think the fair extension of that is, should progress not be happening if it's not increasing the autonomy of anyone? But also I think there's an argument to be made here of like, let's say that I make a new catastrophic, I make the robots from Terminator, right? And I sell them to the most evil guy out there, right? I'm going to be increasing my own autonomy and possibility. I just made $1 billion. I'm going to be the most autonomous, the most possible version of Max Ice that you guys have ever seen. And I'm forgetting all of you and switching up on you the second that happens. But like, all those people those robots are going to be used against are not more autonomous than they were before, right? So I think what can be defined then as progress is perhaps what will increase autonomy and possibility for the largest number of people. Would that be it? I think also there are two very common things that will be said about this. One, you shouldn't be asking for more progress. You're good. You should stop, right? I think that maybe there's credence to that idea, but also like people who bet on the side of regression or not progress are rarely the ones that win. At least in the long run. You know, maybe you'll win for like 10 years, but usually it doesn't go very well. The other thing I think a lot of people will say in response to this is like, oftentimes the autonomy and the possibility of X person will exist at the expense of another. There are cases where that can be true, but I don't take that argument very seriously, because like usually that argument is being used to, once again, going back to what we're talking about, deny, right? Deny, oh, we can't do this for X person because it'll lead to this for Y person. Usually that's not how that works. I think autonomy being at the expense of someone looks more like, I think that me and my, my friend should get paid a little more. That guy gets paid a little bit less now. Usually that's how that works, right? And I don't know. I think there's things to be spoken about there, but I guess that's how I would think progress should happen. This is a big question. I mean, this is a big question to be answering from my cube while I make a painting that I really botched, by the way. I don't know if you guys could tell. This stroke right here is when everything went downhill, and what would otherwise be maybe interesting has ended up being botched. So that's that, guys. That's the thing there. No progress made in this painting. That's the verdict today. But yeah, let me know what progress is to you guys. What do you think here? Sorry, this was vaguely political, and I don't like to do that here on Paint and Talk. So my apologies to anybody who didn't like that. But it's getting uploaded. So check this out on the Instagram if you're mad, and tell me over there and give me a follow while you're doing it. And until next time, guys, gals, and pals, my name is Max Dice. This has been Paint Talk episode 187. I'm here every morning. No, 188. I'm here every morning, painting and talking with you all.